Broadcasting live from atop the Rocky Mountains, the crossroads of the West. You are listening to the Liberty RoundTable Radio Talk Show.
Happy to have you along, my fellow Americans. Sam Bushman live. Dr. Bradley with me last hour. Great hour. Talking about Kevin O'Leary. Discusses Trump accounts. We also talked about Chromebooks killing education. And we talked about a must-read book. Write this down, ladies and gentlemen. E. Merrill Root is the author. E. Merrill Root. And the book is called America's Steadfast Dream. Okay? It's a vision worth defending, ladies and gentlemen. It's a powerful reminder that America's founding ideals are not outdated myths, but living dreams that must be understood, defended, and passed on. That's the big takeaway, ladies and gentlemen. Check out that book. A little hard to get a hold of, but once you get it, you'll be glad you did. All right, Lowell Nelson, campaignforliberty.org. Welcome back to the broadcast, sir. Hope you had a delightful weekend full of God, family, and country.
Sure did, Sam. Glad to be back with you, though. Thank you very much.
So much to talk about, so little time. Ron Paul rolls out another incredible, spot-on, insightful column, Trump's latest regime change. And boy, has it got a lot to it.
Yeah, it has been a while since we talked about the Fed, the Federal Reserve Board, the Federal Reserve System. But I thought it was appropriate because Ron Paul talks about Trump's targeting the Federal Reserve for regime change. I mean, it's kind of an interesting little notion. I mean, he's doing regime change in Venezuela and attempting it in Iran and other places around the globe. And so
even
why not
expecting
do
it
it
might
here
happen
at
in
home,
Cuba by hook or by crook, right?
Or Greenland, who knows, right? So, but a lot of people think that the Federal Reserve Board ought to be apolitical, meaning not influenced at all by policies or by politicians, right? Well, it turns out that throughout history, the president has had a pretty big thumb when it comes to the Federal Reserve Board policy. President Richard Nixon, for example, pressured Fed Chairman Arthur Burns to lower tax rates or interest rates. Nixon and Burns were even recorded joking about Fed independence. Fed Chairman William Martin may not have liked Ike, meaning President Eisenhower, but he caved to President Eisenhower's demands that the Fed increase the money supply. President Bill Clinton persuaded Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan to support Clinton's economic plans. In the most extreme case of presidential pressure, at least until the Justice Department launched its criminal probe into Jerome Powell, was when President Lyndon Johnson shoved the Fed chairman against a wall because the Fed raised interest rates, which caused trouble for Johnson's Great Society at home and for the Vietnam War abroad. So President Trump is thus not different from his predecessors. He is just more transparent, end of quote. It's all of that paragraph, that history where Ron Paul recounts the history of, pressure being applied to the Fed chairman, was all basically a quote from his column. And then Dr. Paul concludes as follows, quote, allowing a secretive central bank to control interest rates and the money supply is the reason the purchasing power of the dollar has vastly declined since 1971, when President Nixon severed the last link between the dollar and gold. Fed-produced fiat currency is also the cause of rising economic inequality and instability. The beneficiaries of this system are the politicians and the corporatist interests living off of the welfare warfare state. On the other hand, President Trump's critics are correct that giving politicians power to set interest rates would be a recipe for disaster. Instead of arguing over who should control the money supply and set rates, President Trump and Congress should work to audit and end the Fed, end of quote. So in other words, Sam, the former congressman doesn't want the Fed to set monetary policy, nor does he want members of Congress to set monetary policy either. He wants the marketplace to set the rate. And I agree. We simply must audit
And when you
the
say
Fed
marketplace
and
set the rate, though, there wouldn't be these uniform standard rates that everybody's forced to march to the tune of. Some bankers might have a little bit more appetite for risk than others. And so you'll see if they have too great of an appetite for risk and then it goes south, you wouldn't have it affecting everybody. You'd only have it affecting the super risk takers. The ones that are more conservative at first would be kind of mocked, like, oh, how dare you? I'm going here, I'm going here. But as things started to melt down, people would flee to the more cautious or more conservative lenders that are watching their P's and Q's, saying, hey, this is too risky or this and that. The market would have a way of policing itself in that regard as well, Lowell.
Exactly right. By marketplace, we mean individual players in the market. So you got banks. You have a bank, you have a credit union. Basically, you have a lender and like an institution that can lend money. Well, if you don't have the central bank dictating interest rates, then an individual bank or private owner of a lending institution can decide what rate he wants to charge, and so he sets the rate for him, whatever. If he has a lot of cash on hand that he wants to lend out, then he's going to maybe set a lower interest rate. Whereas if you have another player in the market who doesn't have any cash to lend, he's going to set his rate a lot higher because he doesn't have, that cash to lend. And so you have all of these players in the marketplace who have varying rates of interest. And so you as a consumer, now you can choose who you want to go and borrow money from. And, typically you're going to go to a lender who is reputable, who has a low interest rate. But, if you do that and you succeed, then that's the marketplace in action, and that's not some central banker telling you what the interest rate shall be. That's the marketplace, setting the rate.
And an individual bank, for example, that may have charged too much interest rate, as they start to see defaults, they could go back and tell everybody, we're going to lower your interest rate. We're just going to give you a blessing right now and lower your interest rate. And what they would do is they would be saving or stemming the tide of defaults and problems. But see, right now you can't do that because you got these Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac involved with all these loans. You've got all these, collateralized debt obligations or whatever. And so everything's merged into one big collateral thing that goes on the stock market or goes in, these hedge funds for management. And so the bank loses control at that point. Well, what that means is nobody can lower interest rates. Nobody can adapt to the market, to the reality of what they're facing. And that's really the problem. We've created such moral hazard in this, and Ron Paul's right to bring this out.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that term moral hazard. That's something that Ron Paul has talked about for years. And it's this idea that the Federal Reserve is going to backstop everything that is lended out by a downstream institution. The banks in your town, for example, they have this backstop that says regardless of what they lend, if people default, the Federal Reserve is going to back them up. And so that's a moral hazard. In other words, there's no incentive for a local bank to be responsible in the money that it lends, right? If they're not going to be held accountable for the money that they lose to make a bad loan, if they're not going to be held accountable for that, then they're going just to loan to anybody and everybody, regardless of the risk. And of course, that's the moral hazard coming into play there. We have to allow banks to be accountable, right? If you're going to lend money, then you have to be accountable for the money that you lend. And that's how we avoid moral hazard is if you have to account for every penny you lend and you make a bad loan, then you're soon going to be out of a job because you make bad loans, right? So that's making the individual bank accountable as a lending institution might be a credit union, whoever, accountable for the loans that they make. We need more of that in the marketplace, more accountability, and not only in the financial institutions, but in medical practices, in healthcare, in education, in everything. If we had more accountability there in the marketplace, then we would have better services being supplied there in the marketplace. Sam?
Yeah, you'd have better services because these organizations could actually have autonomy and decide for themselves when things, like I say, if interest rates are too high and people are struggling and defaulting, a bank could easily say we're going to lower those rates. But right now, hey, they're not responsible. They make the loan based on guidelines, and then they pass it off to somebody else, and these collateralized debt obligations and everything else. And then, hey, who's responsible? The answer, nobody. There's no real accountability. Anyway, Trump is asking for regime change, even at the Fed. I was hoping for a Christmas present to abolish the Fed. No such luck.
Looking for an IT partner that truly understands your needs? Managed IT Services is the answer. We meet with you regularly to discuss your goals and form a tailored technology plan. Our customers have called us a trusted advisor who delivers. When it comes to IT, we do it all. Firewalls, cloud storage, server migration, and more. Say goodbye to long-term contracts and hello to a team that earns your business month after month. Call 801-706-6980 now and let Managed IT Services transform your IT experience.
Have you ever had great honey? No, I mean really good, all-natural, raw honey? Well, now you can, thanks to localhoneyman.com. We can ship out our locally made honey all across the U.S. So don't worry, you won't miss out. Plus, Local Honeyman has so many different flavors, like Utah Wildflower, High Desert Delight, Happy Valley, and Blackberry, just to name a few. So purchase your delicious raw honey today at localhoneyman.com.
Scott Bradley here. Most Americans are painfully aware that the nation is on the wrong track and in dire straits. Unfortunately, most political pundits only nibble around the edges when they claim to address the issues. Even worse, many of the so-called solutions are simply rewarmed servings of what got us into the mess we currently face. And the politicians think we're so gullible and naive that we'll buy their lies that they have reformed and now understand where they led us astray. Unfortunately, the truth of the matter is that they simply wish to continue to hold power. The solution to America's challenges is found in returning to the timeless principles found in the United States Constitution. My book and lecture series will reawaken in Americans an understanding and love of the principles which made this nation the freest, most prosperous, happiest, and most respected nation on earth. Visit topreservethenation.com and order my book and lectures to begin the restoration of this great nation.
This is Lowell Nelson here on Liberty RoundTable Live Friday Shotgun with your host, Sam Bushman. We turn now to another.
All right, we're going to go ahead and try to solve Lowell's audio problem real quick. Sam Bushman, Lowell Nelson back with you live, Liberty Roundtable. Our guest is Lowell Nelson. He's with campaignforliberty.org. He also represents RonPaulInstitute.org. And many of these articles that we're discussing today come from RonPaulInstitute.org. You got to check that out. Trump's latest regime change and the regime change targets, author by Ron Paul, or article by Ron Paul. Very good stuff highlighting we want regime change. It seems like all over the place, including the Federal Reserve. And to me, we just need to abolish and end the Fed. It's creating moral hazard like nobody's business. Okay, you with me, Lowell?
I'm back. Thank you, Sam.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, you're right. We must audit and then end the Fed. That's the real answer here, to give the marketplace back its real autonomy where it ought to be. But this next column, in fact, the rest of the show, Sam, is pretty much devoted to this. The problem in Minnesota, which is not just localized to Minnesota, by the way, but it's kind of a problem that has infected the fabric of our society and has been doing not for just for years, but for decades. We'll get into that. But Andrew Napolitano speaks out against what ICE is doing there in Minnesota. The week before last, it was a gal, see, what was her name? I got it here somewhere. was killed by ICE. And then just last week, this Alex Preddy, 37-year-old federal employee, a nurse, he was killed. By customs enforcement, by ICE, right? Sprayed pepper spray into his eyes, push him to the ground. They took the gun from him that he was carrying lawfully, but he had not brandished at all. But they took his handgun away from him and then shot him. They just shot him right there on the street 9 times, just in the back. Now, and Joel Skousen agrees that shooting Preddy was not justified based on the video evidence that was available so far. According to Politano, he says, quote, under the Constitution, immigration who can legally come to and remain in the United States was left to the states to regulate. And naturalization, meaning who can become an American citizen, was left to the feds, end of quote. And so, I've always read that passage from the Constitution as well, reading that naturalization is a function of the general government, and because they didn't say anything about immigration, that was left to the states, right? The states maintain control of that. So how is it today that the feds control immigration? Well, Judge Knapp answers that question by explaining how Congress enacted the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which is just another example of amending the Constitution by fiat instead of by the ratification of an amendment by 3/4 of the states. The constitutionality of that act, the Chinese Exclusion Act, was challenged, and the U.S. Supreme Court upheld congressional authority to regulate immigration. Right? So where'd they get that power? They just invented it out of nowhere, actually. The court reasoned that when the British troops left the American colonies in 1781, that the power to regulate immigration stayed behind and then somehow magically and metaphysically transferred itself to the new federal government, the one operating under the Articles of Confederation. Right. Well, we had the Articles, and then we had the ratification of the U.S. Constitution, and nowhere in those documents was there given authority to the national government to regulate immigration. But and so that, it really makes no sense to me this whole thing about the general government regulating immigration. The states vested naturalization authority in the new government, but not the authority to regulate immigration, right, despite what Congress says. Nevertheless, during Reagan's administration, Congress enacted the Simpson-Mazzoli Act, which granted amnesty and permanent legal residence to all immigrants then in the United States. And that's kind of where we are today. So the feds think they have the authority to regulate immigration in the various states, but and this is where I'm going to ask you the question, Sam. I think the authority that the feds wield is the authority to repel invasion, which was authority the states vested in Congress of the general government via the Constitution. We find that Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15. But where in the Constitution is the general government given any authority at all to regulate immigration? Sam, you want to weigh in on that?
All right, yeah, let's talk about this for a second. So the Constitution doesn't have the word immigration in it. Okay?
Right.
But if you look at the naturalization clause, we're talking about Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4. Congress does have the power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. This gives Congress clear authority over who may become a citizen. They also can make up rules about entry, status, and removal of non-citizens. Commerce Clause, Article I, Section 8, Clause 3, Congress may regulate commerce with foreign nations. Historically, courts have recognized movement of people across national borders as part of foreign commerce. And that's where the immigration policy comes from. Okay? There's national sovereignty and foreign affairs. Well, what happens when, hey, Congress is supposed to regulate this, but the former president just literally sends out a calling card? Come on in, baby. Take your coat off. We're going to have you. And so the president really lets all these illegals come into the country. Now, the Supreme Court has repeatedly held that immigration control is an inherent power of national sovereignty. And it's a foreign relations discussion. It's a national security discussion. It's a treaty obligation discussions. So states cannot individually set their own immigration policies because it directly affects relations with other nations. It directly affects Congress's ability to determine who can become a citizen and under what guidelines and all these kind of things. So the problem is the Supreme Court has affirmed over the last couple of centuries that immigration authority is primarily federal. Congress has broad authority over those laws. I can go on and on, but here's my point. I understand the hesitation that we have when it comes to separation of powers vertically and horizontally. But what Congress has done nothing. They should have reined in the last president when he let the border leak like a sieve. They should have prosecuted him. They should have impeached him over that. Okay? What Congress can regulate, folks, is important. They can set rules for entry and exclusion, define legal versus illegal status, establish visa systems, determine grounds for deportation, delegating enforcement to the executive branch. That's all fine. I get all that. The problem is they didn't rein in the last president, and this president is taking the world by storm. But again, it becomes a national discussion. The problem is we leave out the states, and we're also leaving out Congress, which is the snafu here. Okay, what Congress cannot do. Congress must still operate within constitutional limits, including due process protections. That's something that's missing right now. Equal protection principles. That's not being dealt with at all. Limits on arbitrary punishment. The courts literally give Congress wide latitude in this compared to other aspects of law. Okay? So yes, Congress does have constitutional authority to regulate immigration, and it's one of the most strongest, most settled powers of the federal government. Well, the problem with that is what does that mean? Does that mean the president can just act unilaterally like he's doing? No, but neither president should have been able to do that. The president that let the border leak like a sieve and promote illegal immigration, and then now the president's cracking down, in my opinion, too hard. I support justice for criminals. Okay, if you're a criminal, I support hard justice measures. But when we come to individuals who may be here, like DACA children that came as kids, or people that are here who have been here for quite a while, who have family ties, who don't have any criminal activity associated with their name, we need a justice/mercy immigration plan. And Congress has been derelict in their duty. So both presidents, both extremes, are left to just act on their own based on their own forethought. And Congress seems to be derelict in their duty and on vacation and not part of it. Congress needs to clearly step up to the plate and uphold the current law. And if there's a justification for changing the laws slightly, that would be a congressional obligation. We're missing all that is the real problem, Lowell.
Yeah, I appreciate you talking about that. You know, I've never really looked at the third clause and the fourth clause in that light. You know, it's regulate commerce with foreign nations. But you know, I guess the movement of natural persons from foreign nations into this country, that certainly, you know, can be viewed like commerce, I guess. Well,
and it's debatable whether it really relates to commerce or not. I don't think it relates to commerce as much as they want you to believe, except that's what the courts have interpreted as. So it's very difficult to pull ourselves away from that, etc. For example, though, Congress, during the Reagan administration, enacted the Simpson-Matsari, or whatever that thing act is called, which granted amnesty and permanent legal residence to many illegals that were in the U.S. at the time.
Yeah.
And so that's where we are today. We're based on that example, too. Let's come back and talk about it. What is the role of the general government when it comes to immigration? Okay? How do we deal with this? We'll talk about it with Lowell Nelson, campaignforliberty.org. You're watching Liberty Roundtable Live.
How would you like to help this program reach more people and earn silver at the same time? Call or text 801-669-2211 for complete details.
Breaking news this hour from Town Hall. I'm Rich Thomason. President Trump isn't backing down in the face of some tough talk from Iran's supreme leader, who warns that any attack by the United States would trigger a regional Middle East war. Mr. Trump's response:
why wouldn't he say that? Of course you can say that, but we have the biggest, most powerful ships in the world over there, very close, a couple of days, and hopefully we'll make a deal. If we don't make a deal, then we'll find out whether or not he was right.
Gaza's Rafah border crossing with Egypt has reopened for limited traffic. It's a key step in the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal. 50 Palestinians are expected to cross in each direction today, the first day of the crossing's reopening. A proposed new federal law would require proof of ID when registering to vote, and the new poll says nearly 3/4 of Americans support that.
The bill is called the SAVE Act, short for Safeguard American Voter Eligibility. Among its terms, it would require U.S. citizens to provide documentary proof of citizenship when registering to vote. Pennsylvania Senator Dave McCormick tells Salem Radio he is a backer.
I've supported legislation along with Bill Hagerty to make sure that we require verification in the census that someone's a U.S. citizen.
Along these lines, 74% of likely U.S. voters believe a photo ID requirement is a reasonable measure to protect election integrity. That's according to a national comprehensive survey by Rasmussen Reports. George Williams, Washington.
The federal government is partially shut down, but this shutdown could be short-lived. A House vote on reopening the government is expected tomorrow. 6 more weeks of winter weather. That's Punxsutawney Phil's prediction. The world-famous Pennsylvania groundhog did see his shadow in Punxsutawney this morning. Wall Street, the Dow up 429 points. More on these stories at townhall.com.
Wesley Financial Group is not a law firm, and Chuck McDowell, definitely not an attorney. This is Chuck. Do you feel stupid for buying a timeshare? Don't. It's not your fault. You were most likely told you could rent it, and it was a great financial investment. And the deal was available today only. If this happened to you, contact your resort or Wesley Financial Group for help today.
Call Wesley now for your free exit information kit. 800-242-3131. 800-242-3131.
My name is Whitney Allen, and I'm a widow. After my husband died, the last thing I wanted to think about was money. Ethos made it affordable to get life insurance. Signing up was fast and 100% online. I knew that I could pay our mortgage and have food in the fridge. I could focus on my kids. No one ever tells you how much you're going to depend on that policy. I am so grateful we had coverage.
Get your free quote at ethos.com/save. That's ethos.com/save. Paid spokesperson. Time spent on application may vary. Online health questions required.
Why don't we say to the government writ large that they have to spend a little bit less? Anybody ever had less money this year than you had last? Anybody ever having a 1% pay cut? You deal with it. That's what government needs, a 1% pay cut. If you take a 1% pay cut across the board, you have more than enough money to actually pay for the disaster relief. But nobody's going to do that because they're fiscally irresponsible. Who are they? Republicans. Who are they? Democrats. Who are they? Virtually the whole body is careless and reckless with your money. So the money will not be offset by cuts anywhere. The money will be added to the debt, and there will be a day of reckoning. What's the day of reckoning? The day of reckoning may well be the collapse of the stock market. The day of reckoning may be the collapse of the dollar. When it comes, I can't tell you exactly, but I can tell you it has happened repeatedly in history when countries ruin their currency.
As you are aware, America is divided over every fault line possible. This is intentionally fostered by those who do not love God, family, or country. We believe a peaceful future as a free people absolutely depends on civility. Clarion Call for Civility is looking for funding and volunteers at every level to make our hopes and efforts a reality. Please donate, sign our pledge, and help us in our sacred cause. Please visit callforcivility.com for more details. Callforcivility.com.
Bypass the mainstream narrative with Liberty News Radio at libertynewsradio.com. Engage with charismatic hosts live or on demand. We cover the crucial news focused on God, family, and country. News that other networks simply refuse to use. Think of LNR's hard-hitting news and podcasts at your fingertips, anytime, anywhere. Join us at libertynewsradio.com. Empower your day with the truth, because the truth will set you free. libertynewsradio.com.
All right, so Congress back in the Reagan administration passed this law that said, hey, everybody gets amnesty. Sadly, that's where I think we're about today. One president was too much, bring them all in, let an invasion happen. The other president's too harsh, locking them all down and causing problems. Congress is derelict in their duty. They should be, literally standing up right now and providing solutions. What they're probably going to do, though, is grant amnesty again. I don't want that, but I think that's what they're going to end up probably doing, because Donald's going to lose big time in the midterms. Congress hasn't accomplished anything in the last year President Trump's been in office. And Trump's been all over the map. And, even conservatives that support Trump, like me, are going, he's gone too far, okay, to kill Renee, whatever her name is, and Renee Good, and to kill Alex Preddy. Okay, it's problematic. And should these people be in the streets in the first place? No, they're not involved in peaceful assemblies. But at the same time, is it bordering on insurrection? Trump says so. If we're not very careful, though, what is Congress even doing? They're not providing any guidance or support. So what is the role of the general government when it comes to immigration? And downstream from immigration, what about after an invasion takes place? What should the government be doing? What should Trump be doing? What should Congress be doing? I would say this. I wrote a justice/mercy plan for immigration. And I think people need to put together common sense things like that. Everybody agrees that the hardcore criminal, rapist, murderer, people being emptied out from prisons that are gang members from other countries coming here, everybody agrees we need hardcore justice to stop that. But everybody does not agree when it comes to, hey, attacking U.S. citizens without due process, deporting people without, okay, at some point we've crossed a line. Both extremes are problematic, Lowell.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't know if I had to lay blame. It'd be primarily defeating Congress.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get Lowell's line fixed again. I apologize for that, ladies and gentlemen. We need to realize that we've got to, work on immigration enforcement. Okay? There's all kinds of promised ideas for changing immigration enforcement. Adam Dick even writes a column about this that we'll get into here in just a second. But I'm telling you, we've got to change the way we're dealing with this. And our immigration policies are primarily the problem. And when there's policies in place, we don't obey them. So what Dr. Bradley would wisely say is, first, we need to obey the laws on the books. Secondly, we need to have an open, honest, candid discussion about what makes sense when it comes to immigration and who has what authority, where, when, and how. That's being debated big time, real time, right now with dire consequences. All right, you back, Lowell? All right, we'll get Lowell back in a minute. But the role of the general government when it comes to immigration is pretty cut, dried, and clear. The role of when one president lets everybody in, lets an invasion happen on his watch, what does the next president do about it? Does he just force them all to leave? All right, we had, I think, Operation Wetback at the time, and we removed a lot of illegals. We've also had, under the Ronald Reagan administration, granting them all amnesty. See, that's what I mean. These extremes between Biden and Donald, these extremes between Operation Wetback and, this amnesty program that was put together by Congress under Reagan, those are the extremes. There's got to be common sense in the middle. Are you there, Lowell?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yes, sir. You sound great. Go ahead. So I'm mentioning the extremes are really the problem here. And I'm mentioning this fact that Adam Dick wrote a great column talking about promised ideas for changing immigration enforcement. There's a lot on the table about this, and people are debating it till the cows come home, right?
Yeah, they are. And that's why the solution really rests with Congress. I mean, they shouldn't allow the president to be the extreme, right? You've got Democrat Biden that wants everybody and their dog to come in, and you have Trump on the other extreme saying, no, we don't want everybody and their dog to come in, and we're going to kick out the ones that the previous president let in. But if Congress would lay down the law, and maybe they have. I mean, maybe we're simply not enforcing it, but that's their job, is to require that the president enforce the law. He's the chief executive, right? He's the one who's in charge of executing the laws, and so he should be doing that. And if Biden didn't do that, then he should have been impeached for
That's
failure,
right. And
dereliction of duty.
Tom Holman, when people attack him, he just says, look, I'm hired to enforce the law, which I'm going to do. You don't like the law?
Yeah.
Talk to Congress. They're the ones that made them.
Yeah.
And he's exactly right.
Yeah, absolutely right. So I'm with you on this. We shouldn't allow the president of the United States to make up the law. He should be executing the law, enforcing the law. We should have Congress, which tends to shift, one way or the other, less so. They're less mercurial, right? I mean, they are more middle of the road, and that way other countries can plan on the same policy despite who the president is. From administration to administration, the policy remains the same. And that's what we need. We need the stability of a good working policy that stays the same decade after decade, right? That's going to work for us. That's the real solution, in my opinion. Sam, now as far as the ideas that Adam Dick put on the table, it's actually, he was reporting what some of the ideas that some of our congressmen have put forward, and they're very good, right? Put an end to roving patrols, tightening the rules governing the use of warrants. See, I think that's a real problem. Is I don't know that these ICE agents have warrants for who they arrest, right? I mean, they just pick up a whole bunch of people and then sort them out, right? I think we need to be more specific about the use of warrants. We need to require ICE to coordinate with state and local law enforcement. I think that's one of the big problems in Minnesota, is that either the state and local authorities are not working with ICE, or they're not being contacted by ICE and invited to work together. I mean, I don't know what the problem there is, but they certainly aren't working together. And another idea is to implement a uniform code of conduct that holds federal law enforcement to the same set of standards that apply to state and local agencies.
Well, the real problem is we shouldn't have those federal forces to that degree in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Plus, they're wearing masks, so you can't identify them. They don't identify themselves. They don't wear body cameras, and they don't carry proper identification. And so, I mean, how do you know that it's not a real burglar outside your door demanding that you open up, right? If they're not going to identify themselves as police, then you don't know whether they're police or not. So I think these are good common sense suggestions being brought forward, and we need to do more. But there's the problem in Minnesota. Not only are they not working together, but the federal agents they don't think that they're accountable for the people that they killed, right? They killed Renee Good. She was in her vehicle, and she backed up her vehicle, turned her wheel hard to turn right, and yet the ICE agent was still standing in front of her, in fact, closed the distance toward her. And so when she tried, she was moving at, just 2 or 3 miles an hour to trying to turn right to get out, so she didn't hit the agent. He nevertheless fired into her windshield, and then as she went by, fired 2 more shots through the side window at her, and totally unjustified. Did he fear for his life? Well, I don't think a reasonable person would have agreed that he was fearing for his life. He was moving so slowly, and also had the wheel turn. It wasn't like he was trying to run him over.
And the problem is these people are turning vehicles into weapons. You get this other guy, this Alex Pretty guy, who smashed out the taillights of a vehicle. So there's no doubt there's trouble on both sides, ladies and gentlemen. I agree with that 100%. But what is the goal of the general government when it comes to immigration? In my mind, it would be to stop bad guys from coming to the country, to stop people with illness and disease and everything else that could infect the country, to stop that, to vet people and to invite people to join Americans and become Americans at a rate of assimilation that we could handle appropriately. That's how it used to be done with Ellis Island and all these other things. Okay, there's promising ideas for changing this enforcement. That's good. But see, everybody's just kind of talking. They've had a year to act and a year to clarify, hey, we don't want the Reagan amnesty plan. We don't want the plan of Operation Wetback. We don't want the plan of Biden bring all the citizens in and give them everything they want. There needs to be a common sense plan of justice and mercy that literally looks at groups of people based on guidelines. Those who came here not to their own fault, and that's all they know. That's a big difference from those who get emptied out of a foreign country's gang prison and brought to the country. And we need to act accordingly to that. And the only problem that I have with what Tom Homan and those guys are doing, I love what they're doing and think it needs to be done for the most part because we have too many criminals in the country. But at the end of the day, hey, Tom Homan and those guys need to kind of separate the justice and the mercy plan a little bit so that Americans can get behind it and say, listen, we're not going after the, people who may be here for certain reasons that are good, for the most part, law-abiding people. Yeah, they're here illegally, but the former president literally invited them. We've got to take responsibility at a government level as well for this. Okay, we're treating people as enemy combatants, not just illegals either, says Ted Galen Carpenter. We'll talk about his column in seconds. You're watching Lowell Nelson, Sam Bushman, the one and only truth-telling Liberty Roundtable Live.
Attention collectors and savvy investors. We are excited to announce a momentous evolution in our journey. Introducing Free Water Coin Company, formerly known as Rust Coin and Gift. This rebranding takes us back to the very roots of where it all began. Free Water, Oregon. It's a tribute to the legacy of Al Rust and a celebration of 3 generations of dedication to excellence in the world of coins and precious gifts. Al, Brian, and Jake Rust standing strong through 64 years of service. Discover a world of exceptional service at Free Water Coin Company, your premier destination for genuine, honest money and precious gifts. Under Brian's expert guidance, Free Water Coin Company, building on the legacy of Rust Coin and Gift, continues its tradition of trust and excellence. Visit us at our Provo, Utah location. Explore our treasures online at freewatercoinco.com or call us at 801-377-1574. Free Water Coin Company, where your future is built one honest coin at a time.
Introducing Managed IT Services from NPI. We offer top-notch data backup and recovery, email spam protection, and network security tailored to your needs and budget. With 20-plus years of experience in the medical field, our HIPAA-certified consultants know what it takes to protect sensitive information. Don't settle for less. Give us a call at 801-706-6980 and experience the difference with Managed IT Services. Remember, your IT support should be fast, efficient, and reliable.
Introducing PrepStartsNow.com, your ultimate guide to readiness and peace of mind. We offer practical preparedness tools, training, and education to take your family's household readiness to the next level. Browse the prep shop for essential products, check out our planning guides, and stay informed with our prep blog. Visit PrepStartsNow.com and subscribe to our emails for exclusive offers, new products, and future events. Remember, preparedness begins with PrepStartsNow.com.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Liberty Roundtable Live. This is Lowell Nelson riding shotgun with your host, Sam Bushman. Ted Carpenter has a great column about this issue in Minnesota. He piles on, basically, writes that this problem did not originate with ICE last week, but that it has been happening slowly over the past several decades. Quote, the dangerous militarization of law enforcement agencies and the corresponding contempt for constitutional rights that those agencies exhibit began many decades ago, and the situation has inexorably worsened over that long period. End of quote. Now, Ted Carpenter believes there's still time to set things straight, but we have to recognize there's a big difference between the U.S. military and domestic law enforcement. He says, quote, the rationale for the U.S. military is to defeat a designated enemy and eliminate a national security threat. The mandate for police personnel is supposed to be to protect the life, liberty, and property of people residing in their state by apprehending criminals who violate those rights. End of quote. And so this is a huge difference between the two. I mean, if you look at Alex Preddy's murder He was on the ground, and yet the ICE officer took out his gun and shot him just 9 times in the back. And so that's a military activity, in my opinion. You look at that and you say, wow, that guy is probably ex-military, because he has a designated enemy, and then he eliminated the threat. That's exactly what he did. Now, that's not what a peace officer would do. A peace officer, meaning a member of your local police force, they're supposed to protect the life, liberty, and property of people. Now, if you have a man held down on the ground who is subdued, you don't pull out your gun and shoot him in the back, right? You simply apprehend him. I mean, if you think he's a criminal, you apprehend him and turn him over to the justice system so that he can face his accusers, so that he can be prosecuted, and so that justice may be done. But what we saw in Minnesota was basically a military response to a disturbance in the street. Now, Carpenter is saying those two have become dangerously conflated in the recent decades. Quote, "The unpleasant reality is that the U.S. military has always treated designated enemies in a harsh, uncompromising fashion throughout our history. U.S. forces frequently have treated enemy civilian populations in an appallingly brutal fashion, from the Korean police action in the early 1950s to the U.S. military interventions in Vietnam, Iraq, the Balkans, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and elsewhere. Washington's human rights abuses are legendary. In a perverse and poignant fashion, U.S. imperial policy has now come home to roost." End of quote. Very interesting observation, right? This policy that we have had for decades. You're seeing a lot of people that are
constitutionalists, Lowell, speaking out against this, saying we support the immigration status. We don't want illegals in our country. But they're starting to realize, just like the John Birch Society has said for quite some time, support your local police and keep them independent. That's a critical idea that I think is really, really important. And, when does it become judge, jury, executioner without any due process of law, without any checks and balances? When the government ends up deciding who lives and dies, that's a big problem. And that's what we're starting to see.
That's right, Sam. Waco should have been a wake-up call. Ruby Ridge in Idaho, that should have been a wake-up call. But the public simply was not outraged enough to make a change in the policy. Yep, Lavoy-Finicum, the kill stop there. I mean, these should have been wake-up calls for us to make a change, but we haven't made the necessary change yet. And so John and Nisha Whitehead have a column. They chime in on this, and of course they have the right answer. They say, quote, "A government that acts as if freedoms or privileges granted by the state has abandoned the foundational principle that rights are inherent and inalienable. We see it in a system that celebrates the sanctity of life before birth while expanding the machinery of death after birth through executions carried out in the name of justice, militarized policing carried out in the name of order, indefinite detention carried out in the name of security, shoot-first enforcement regimes that treat civilians as threats rather than as human beings, and endless wars driven by greed, profit, and ego. Nor are these executions limited to death chambers. As the killing of Renee Good makes clear, the modern police state now carries out executions in the streets without trial, without jury, and without meaningful accountability. Alex Preddy's death was the foreseeable end result of a system that normalizes state violence, immunizes authority from accountability, and treats human life as collateral damage. The moment government agents are permitted to take life without due process, judicial oversight, and genuine accountability, the Constitution's promise of equal protection and the rule of law ceases to exist in practice. When federal agencies become standing armies, when enforcement replaces justice, when force substitutes for law, and when accountability disappears behind claims of immunity and national security, the Constitution is no longer functioning as intended. End of quote. That's a pretty long quote, Sam, but I really like the way John and Nisha Whitehead put it there. Now, Whitehead's answer is the same as Carpenter's answer. Demilitarize the police, end warrantless and no-knock raids, restore strict limits on federal enforcement authority, and hold agents accountable when they abuse power. That's really the answer, and we're hearing it from many, many different authors this week and last, that we need to demilitarize our police. This great, this movement over the past 10, 20, 30 years to militarize our police, that is one of the reasons we're in the situation we're in, is that our domestic law enforcement agents are acting like military, not like peace officers. Another good reason to join the Constitutional Sheriff and Peace Officers Association, because they teach this principle loud and clear. A peace officer is to sue for peace, right, and to help, help there be peace in our community,
and to guarantee due process and probable cause for all. You heard me, for all. I didn't say for all citizens, for all. And the due process level may not be the same, and the probable cause level may not be the same for a citizen than it is for an illegal. But it needs to be done, and that's why the John Birch Society really highlights this point, and I want to reiterate it because I think it's really the solution. Support your local police and keep them independent. Independent from military hardware distributed by the government and by the military-industrial complex. Keep them separate from the general government. Keep them separate from the state government. That's why the county sheriff is so vital, because community policing would suggest that they know their people and they know who's there. And you would never have a judge, jury, and executioner scenario under a sheriff, because he would say, hey, my job is to make sure that government agents do not take life without due process. When federal agents become standing armies, that's what we're seeing now. And then you're seeing the pushback from the states and from all this is breakdown because we're not respecting the separation of powers vertically and horizontally. We need to collaborate. We need to be civil, and we need to find a way forward that is supported by the citizenry, enacted by Congress, carried out by the president when conflicts arise, adjudicated by the courts. But at the end of the day, the Constitution is the only solution. It can work, but not if we ignore it, Lowell.
Yes, and I suggest we take every opportunity to meet with our local law enforcement whenever we can. For instance, in Highland City here, we have the police chief will often attend those meetings, and so I've made it a point to introduce myself to him. His name is Chief Botkin, Kim Botkin, and the more interaction that he has with the citizenry, the more feeling of community that he will feel. He'll be less likely to turn over the enforcement of laws to some national police force or some outside group, and the more likely he will be to maintain authority and control over the law enforcement here in the city of Highland. Same thing goes with the sheriff. I always shake hands with the sheriff. I always say hello to him and his wife. He attends numerous party events like party conventions and vetting opportunities. When candidates are running for office and you've got a lot of delegates vetting the candidates, often Sheriff Smith will be there, and so I think it's important that he knows us and we know him. That's how we can encourage him to follow the law, to protect citizens, to protect their lives, liberty, and property, is if he knows us, right? If we're friends with him. So whether it's your local policeman, your local peace officer, or your sheriff, get to know them, talk with them as often as you can, and befriend them and help them understand that you are a citizen whose life is worth protecting. Sam?
We need police and peace officers, local and independent. We need to develop relationships with them so that we can be the eyes and ears. They can depend on us, and we can depend on them in a healthy community policing style relationship. It is possible, folks, and we the people are the boss. They work for us. Therefore, we need to provide the civil dialogue and the lead role in making sure that everyone receives probable cause and due process of law. For Lowell Nelson, CampaignForLiberty.org, RonPaulInstitute.org, thank you so much. I'm Sam Bushman. We keep all these topics front and center, and the Constitution is the solution. God save our republic.